First of all, thank you so much for the invitation. It really does look like an inspiring program, and both Tina and I are really happy to be able to share this part of our work with you. So I'm Julie Uldam, and I'm based at the Department of Management, Society and Communication at Copenhagen Business School. And Tina Ascanius, my partner in crime for, I think this is like our 10-year anniversary work that I'm presenting today, is based at Malmö University at the Department of Media and Communication. And yeah, so this work that I'll be talking a little bit about today, we started doing because it's 10 years ago that we, no, it's not true. It's 11 years ago. It sounded so much better with 10 years, but it's 11 years ago that we started researching climate activism, and together, and the COVID-19 pandemic then came as another reason to once again look at climate justice activism in the face of this crisis, and more specifically how we wanted to look at how climate activists see the crisis as a momentum for change, and possibly radical change. So, and that's because crisis is often seen as a moment of rupture. And indeed, that was also what we were seeing with the emergence of rival discourses, and that would be discourses rival to the dominant discourse of economic growth. So rival discourses talking about degrowth and different ways of organizing society started to emerge along with the lockdowns that were responses to COVID-19. And for climate activists, which we then started to look at, this appeared in two ways. So first, I'll say a little bit about the tactical challenge that the lockdown and the pandemic entailed for climate activists and how they responded. And then I'll say a little bit about how we've seen them try to articulate the crisis, or try to use the crisis as a window of opportunity for arguing for change. So first of all, the tactical challenge, which of course relates to not being able to meet in person, not being able to gather physically to protest and to argue for change. And the activists that we looked at both networks, fluid networks, and formal organizations like NGOs in both Denmark and Sweden. We wanted to compare what was going on because Denmark and Sweden in many ways are similar, but also because the Danish and the Swedish responses on a governmental level to the pandemic has been quite different. with Denmark being one of the first countries to announce a complete lockdown, and Sweden avoiding or insisting on not having a complete lockdown at any point during the pandemic so far. But what we found was no major differences. So basically, the activists and the NGOs that we've been looking at have more or less responded in similar ways. So not only in Denmark, where there was a long, complete lockdown, but also in Sweden, without a lockdown, activists turned to different forms of organizing, different forms of protesting, and different forms for arguing for societal change, avoiding physical interaction, and instead using digital media, and especially, of course, social media platforms. So this is from a Swedish group, very Swedishly called European Changemakers, from Facebook, saying, how do you do safe actions at times of COVID, and how do you avoid backlash, and join our webinar on COVID-proof actions. A Danish example is from the Danish version of Extinction Rebellion, who called for people to hang banners from their windows, because we can't meet with our placards or banners, so hang them from your windows. This is a safe tactic. What's interesting, and what's also similar between Denmark and Sweden, is that the most active groups are indeed the fluid networks, like the European Changemakers, Push and Extinction Rebellion, and much less active in terms of organizing the so-called COVID-friendly or unfriendly actions, where the NGOs, so the NGOs, the formally organized organizations, were much less active, and especially the reformist organizations like the World Wildlife Foundation. They didn't organize anything that related to the COVID-19 crisis as an opportunity for bringing about change to mitigate the climate crisis. Greenpeace was more active, but the most active groups were the fluid networks like Extinction Rebellion. So that's like the tactical challenge, and how the different groups try to meet that. And in terms of rival discourses, just to give you a little bit of theory, our analysis draws on social imaginaries, and more specifically from organization studies, Levy and Spicer, who have identified 4 types of climate imaginaries that they call fossil fuels forever, climate apocalypse, the techno market, and sustainable lifestyle. The fossil fuels forever climate imaginary, they argue, is the dominant imaginary, the one that is grounded in economic growth. The climate apocalypse is, as you can maybe guess, so one often drawn on by activists, and especially radical climate change activists. For example, saying the climate crisis is now and it's urgent. And for example, in the words words of Greta Thunberg, our house is on fire. Right, then there's a techno market, technical fixes for mitigating the climate crisis, like carbon capture and so on, and sustainable lifestyle, which is the one we see promoted in relation to consumer activism and consumer lifestyle choices that are often individualized, and so it's your individual responsibility to do something. So what we found, again, across Sweden and Denmark and across the groups that were active, was the climate apocalypse. But not just the climate apocalypse as this dystopian, as it often is, dystopian vision, but rather combined with hope rather than despair. So what we found was activists doing this in two ways, both in relation to short-term possibilities. So like a green restart spurred by government initiatives, rather than a fossil fuel restart. And one of the most prominent cases mentioned by these activists, probably because we're talking about Sweden and Denmark, and the case of the Scandinavian airlines, like airlines across the world have been suffering, so have the Scandinavian airlines, and there's been a lot of talk about government bailout for the Scandinavian airlines, and indeed there has been government bailout for Scandinavian airlines, which made activists protest, saying that this is a fossil fuel bailout. Why not focus on investing in green initiatives as a part of a wider societal bailout? So that's like the short term. And for a longer term perspective, activists have called for and are still calling for a rethinking of how we organize a society, especially in relation to degrowth. So with the lockdown, we've seen people work less and manage in different ways, and why not let ourselves be, and our governments be, inspired by this to rethink the organization of society more widely. And just to finish and stay within my 15 allotted minutes, what we don't know yet, of course, but what remains to be seen is whether this persistence of these rival discourses of degrowth will continue, or if we'll have what Levy and Spicer call fossil fuels forever, if that forever will really remain the dominant discourse. And of course, it's a little misleading that I put an or here, because it's most likely not a question of either or, but a question of the rival discourses of degrowth continuing to challenge the fossil fuels forever discourse. But what remains to be seen is if they'll turn more mainstream, because until now, until this crisis, they have been more or less circulating at the margins of activist discourses, and mostly in the radical circles of climate justice activism. Thank you.